Studio 33 AD, Catholic Media.
Hi, I'm John O'Hagan again, and today we're going to talk about some odd little features, some anomalies, I guess, of the cathedral that most people might not be aware of. And one of the reasons I was asked to do these videos was because I wrote this book on the history of the cathedral, and so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of research, crawl through a lot of dusty spaces and musty files, and so I found things in there that a lot of everyday people don't know, and I'm going to share some of those with you today. And the first has to do with the relics in our old original high altar. In that era, it's no longer necessarily true in today's church, but when this church was built, every church had to have some relics in its altar. And the relics in this high altar were placed in this little recessed area, which is right in front of the tabernacle, and it was right in front of the tabernacle when this was the old main high altar. And as you can see, it's just an empty space now. What happened to those relics? And what were those relics? Well, let me answer the first question. What happened to those relics? When the church was renovated in the late 70s, those relics were taken out of this altar by the then pastor of St. John's, Andy Schumacher. And at that time, he wrote a very detailed letter, which is in the files over here at the office. At that time, Father Schumacher dictated a letter and signed it and said something to the effect of, "This is to attest on this date, blah-de-blah, whatever, I removed from the high altar of St. John's Cathedral the relics." And those relics were relics of the holy martyrs Prospera and Fulgentia, as well as, quote, particles of dirt from the tomb of St. John the Evangelist. So those were the relics that were placed here. They were then removed in the late 70s when post-Vatican II renovation was done of the cathedral. And what happened to them? They were placed in the new altar. Presumably they're still there because that altar has never been altered since that time. Been altered? The relics are there in our new altar. Okay, the next little odd feature of our cathedral that I'm going to point out is actually it's a series of odd features, and it is, as you walk down the two side aisles, you'll see these obviously covered up with some kind of plaster or something hole just below our wonderful electrical heating system. Because what we're looking at here, these holes or patched up holes in the floor, were originally water pipes that came up to radiators. And for those of you who don't know what a radiator is, other than something on a car, but a radiator, the heater, was a device full of water. The furnace in the basement of the cathedral, and at that time, the furnace was coal-fed. There was electricity in the cathedral when it was built, but they certainly didn't heat it with that. They heated it with coal, and huge tanks of water, once they got boiling and producing steam, were piped up. Water pipes came up, fed water into then what were radiators, hot water, and that's where the term radiator comes from. They would radiate heat with all that hot water in them. And that's how our cathedral was heated, probably until, I think, maybe the very early 50s. I'd like to point out another very, very inconspicuous feature, but one that to me is kind of interesting. A lot of people look at the decorations of our cathedral and they assume that they're a wallpaper or something embedded in there. They're actually painted, and the paint you're looking at today is the original paint, 100 years old. But once they had cleaned this off, they discovered that the painting is of such high quality that they didn't need to do anything with it. They didn't need to touch it up. Maybe there was some touch up in some areas, particular areas that might have been damaged, but overall the painting had lasted for 100 years. And I like to point out here, which nobody would notice, there's a drip, a paint drip, a red drip there. And this again is proof positive that these are paintings and they're not embossed or wallpaper or something. Somebody was painting some of the red up there and it dripped down here and they didn't notice it, and it stayed just like all the painting. It's lasted for over 100 years. I'm pointing to a little screw hole here in this pew. I'm in the second to the last pew on the right hand side as you walk up the main aisle. But if you look in any of the pews, if you look carefully, these pews have been painted a few times, refinished a few times. You'll see that hole in every pew, and you'll see it goes all across the length of the pews from aisle to aisle. And here is the feature. That's what those holes were. And I like to ask people, what is this? What was its purpose? What those are hat holders. When the church was built in the early 20th century, no man in the world would go outside without a hat or a cap on. You could take off your cap and snap it in there, and then it was safe. And if you had a hat, particularly a hat, and not so much a cap, but a fedora or Homburg, if you had a hat such as that and you left it on the pew, you were going to get it squashed in one of those up and down episodes. So the churches had these all across the back of the pew, so the person sitting in this seat could hang his hat on that and be safe throughout Mass. Okay, what we're talking about now, and I'm holding the rope or the pull for the original bell. This is in St. John's Cathedral. As a matter of fact, the bell at the end of this rope is the oldest thing in this cathedral. It's 20, 30 years older than the cathedral itself. The bell that's up there was the bell that was in the original St. John's Cathedral down at the corner of 9th and Bannock. Right now there's a Chinese restaurant called the Young Tsing. That was the site of the original St. John's Cathedral in Boise for many years, and ultimately it was moved to this site. When it was moved, pretty much the only thing that was moved with it was the bell. So that's the fascinating story of this rope and the bell that's attached to it, which, as I said, we could ring, but I don't think I should in the middle of the day today. Speaking of which, can you hear in the background? The bells are ringing. That's not this bell. I haven't done anything. I haven't touched it. But a couple of years ago, I'm not exactly sure when, an electronically programmed carillon was put up in the main tower of the church, I guess the two. Okay. And that is the bell that people now hear when St. John's Cathedral bells are ringing. We're now on the the north side of the cathedral. But when the cathedral was being built in the early 1900s, fire codes and such didn't really worry about a lot of things that people worry about today. And this is a fire escape built for people who are in the choir loft. It would provide you access in the event of a fire. Fortunately, as far as I know, it's never been utilized, never been needed. One of the featured things I'd like to point out here is that if you look at this very lowest course of stonework, it's slightly darker than the one above it. But the real key to what I'm going to point out is that that lower course, unlike all these other courses, is comprised of much smaller stones. That's because when the cathedral was built, that lowest course there was going to be below the ground when all the backfilling was done. And it was below the ground because this was all lawn across here until you went to the entrance of the day chapel. But I don't know, I want to say in the late 1980s, renovations were done to the day chapel, and at that time renovations were done to this area out here. The ground just went right across here, pretty much on a level with the existing sidewalk. If you go stand out on the sidewalk, just project that all the way across, it came right up to here, and then that was undone when this whole courtyard area was done. For our final little segment today, we're now back, we're still outside, and we're in the front. Certainly when this cathedral was built, any significant building had a cornerstone laid to preserve for all time the beginning of the cathedral. And that's our cornerstone up there. And what it says is AD, which is an abbreviation for the Latin phrase Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. And unless you're a big Super Bowl fan, you probably don't know what those Roman numerals are, but take my word for it, they say 1906. That's when this cornerstone was laid. That was essentially the beginning of our cathedral. I'd like to point out to people that it took 15 years to complete this cathedral. It was begun in 1906, but it wasn't finished or dedicated until 1921. So it's St. John's Cathedral, year of our Lord, 1906.
Studio 33 AD, Catholic Media.